So, as I mentioned before, this is a quick study on existentialism and a little bit of absurdity. We're going to review two videos tonight that are short videos that we'll pause here and there just to talk a little bit about philosophy. Feel free to throw your questions in the chat, but we're learning tonight. So, just a little background on me is I have spent quite some college credits on philosophy in seminary, and so I've studied worldviews, world religions, philosophies, the history of philosophy, and tonight we're going to be at existentialism, and it's what I like. Existentialism is it's known in some books that I've read as the search for meaning and the attempt to escape nihilism. So if you look at the history of the world in philosophy specifically, it all kind of ends up in nihilism. Now we've moved beyond nihilism as a culture, but with other philosophies, with existentialism and a few in between, postmodernism. But I would like to say that when nihilism arrived on the scene, it kind of was here to stay. People who have attempted to escape nihilism, I will say, have done so unsuccessfully in many ways. Last night, I was chatting with a fellow, and lucky for me, he wanted to get philosophical in our conversation, and he didn't even know that I love that. And so it was an early Christmas present for me. And he wanted to talk about the purpose of life, the meaning of life. And so he was coming from a very naturalistic perspective. And he began to talk about how the purpose of life is survival. And I said, so why do you wake up every morning? He said, to survive. And I said, okay, why do you keep on going? Why? What's your meaning in life? Why do you exist? What's your drive? And he didn't know how to answer that question. I could tell he was quite flustered by that question. All of a sudden, I was face to face with a man who had no purpose. A man who did not know his purpose. He was thinking very intellectually, and I appreciated that. And obviously, he went philosophical, scientific, right from the get-go. But he was stuck in this loss of hope. And so Jen asks, what is the word nihilism? And so nihilism, as we'll get into a little bit tonight, as a precursor to existentialism, but nihilism is the belief that everything is meaningless. We exist, but there's no purpose in your existence. There's no reason to exist. You are just here. And so it's really depressing because the only meaningful choice you can make according to core nihilistic doctrine is the only meaningful choice you can make is to end your life. And I know it's dark. The only thing, so life is meaningless. Existing is meaningless. Whatever's going to happen will happen whether you do anything or not. So the only meaningful choice you can make is to opt out. It's got to be such a problem when this was being taught in universities that one of the prominent scholars of nihilism actually had to have his students agree when taking his class that they wouldn't commit suicide while studying nihilism because it is so hopeless. And so that's the thing. Sean, when we interviewed him, back on Mormonism, and we were asking a little bit about, what his current beliefs are, he was talking about the utter meaninglessness of life unless you assign it meaning, unless you give life meaning. And that's where existentialism really comes in and why we're going to look at it tonight. Because as an attempt, it's a search for meaning. So as an attempt to escape nihilism, the idea that life is utterly meaningless and utterly pointless, we need to assign meaning, right? That's where the naturalistic world perspective of philosophy has gone. Now it's interesting because you see this two places in Christian doctrine. And I thought that was interesting just to bring that up. And then I'm actually going to be talking a little bit more about this tomorrow at my on my review of Hebrews Part 2, which I've titled "Divorce the World." So that'll be tomorrow, 7 p.m. CST. But you see this in Christian doctrine in two places. One, you see it where Paul said, if there is no death and resurrection, right? If Jesus Christ was not the Messiah, then we're of all people most pitied. We're wasting our time. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Like, they're just live it up. Just be given to hedonism, into just doing whatever it is you want to do, because it's all meaningless. It's all hopeless. And so Paul, it's interesting, thousands of years ago, came to the same conclusion. If there is no religion, if there is no God, if everything is natural, then we're screwed. There's no point, and you should pity all the Christians for wasting all of their time. So it's funny, it's right there in Christian doctrine. It's also in Ecclesiastes, and now that we're talking the Old Testament, so even more centuries pass and or go, and Solomon, the noted as the wisest man who ever lived, according to Scripture, according to church history. He came up with the idea that everything, he uses the word hevel, everything is meaningless, everything is fruitless, everything under the sun is pointless. He lived it up. He threw all the parties, he married all the wives, he had all the shiny stuff, he had all the cool toys, and it was all meaningless. It was all hevel, he said. And so he became nihilistic, and he said, but how did he escape nihilism? Is he said, here's the true meaning of life. Fear God and do what he says, right? That's what Solomon came up with. Fear God, do what he says. Nothing else really matters. He said, build a kingdom and see if it's still there in 1,000 years. He said, climb a mountain and see if it cares after you die. Raise kids and see if if the generations past will even remember you. And so, which is funny because he was recorded in one of the most famous books anywhere. But his whole point was, everything's meaningless. Everything is pointless. Nihilism. Except he escaped nihilism through Christian doctrine, through Judeo-Christian doctrine of, what is the meaning of life then? Fear God, do what he says. So anyways, that is really interesting. We'll get more into that tomorrow on Christian doctrine, but I always like to come from the perspective that I grew up in and try to create this juxtaposition, this, here's one, here's the other. So let's get into existentialism. Now, what's interesting is a lot of the existentialists don't refer to themselves as existential. Some of them even coined the term and later get rid of the term. We'll see that here in a moment. But we've gone back and kind of examined as a culture, examined as a people, like as a school of thought, who were the forefathers and the fathers of existentialism, and this is where we go. And so let's get into this. Let's get into this really interesting study. So we're gonna go here, and we'll start with this. So this is just going to be a rough overview of existentialism, and then they're going to mention what's known as the Myth of Sisyphus, and we're going to get into the Myth of Sisyphus and why it's so prevalent for our second video. So let's start here tonight.
What is the meaning of life? It is likely that you have asked yourself this question before. This is known as an existential crisis, a state in which you re-examine your life in the context of death and are impacted by the contemplation of the meaning, purpose, or value of life. Existentialism is a philosophy that explores this problem of human existence, with an emphasis on the individual who starts in an apparently meaningless world, and who seeks to create meaning in a world without inherent meaning. Existentialism is most commonly associated with several 19th and 20th century philosophers: Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. However, many of these thinkers never used the term existentialist to describe themselves. Some of them even rejected the label, while others accepted it. What they did share is a common template. Many of them regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies too abstract and remote from concrete human experience, and focus on the authenticity of the individual. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard is regarded as the father of existentialism, who, along with Nietzsche, provided the basic foundations of 19th century existentialism. Dostoevsky is a key figure as well. Although he was a novelist more than a philosopher, he was one of the first to properly define key existentialist ideas. Walter Kaufmann declares, "It is as if Kierkegaard had stepped right out of Dostoevsky's pen." Thus, existentialism is...
So right away, I want to point out with some of these guys, like he was saying, like they don't consider themselves existentialists. Some of them, like Frederick Nietzsche, was more of a nihilist, but it was out of the depression of nihilism that he kind of came up with more of his existential thoughts. What's interesting about Frederick Nietzsche is he's most commonly known for, or famously known for, writing the little poem "God is dead and we've killed him," and he writes about this madman who is like almost like he's come from another time and place, and he's like, "God's dead, God's dead," and then everyone's laughing at him, and he's like, "This madman," and he's like, "You don't understand. God is dead and we've killed him, and it's not a good thing. It's a bad thing." And his point is that he doesn't believe in God, but without God, there is no meaning in life. And so this guy is like, "God's dead." And the people looking on are like, "Haha, yeah, he is." And then he's like, "You don't understand." He's like, "I've come too soon. You don't understand. You don't understand how terrible this is that God is dead." And so it's a really interesting belief system that he had. And again, we'll see in this his search for purpose. Then, if there is no higher power, if there is no God, if there is no, goddess or whatever, if there's no higher being assigning you purpose, marshaling you towards purpose, where do you find your purpose? And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight: purpose. And I'm really excited to get into absurdity, which will come more in the Myth of Sisyphus. But so let's keep going.
Not just about philosophy, but also combined together into novels, literature, and poetry. Notes from the Underground is one of the most important works of existentialist literature, where Dostoevsky attempts to justify the existence of individual freedom as a necessary part of humankind. He argues that the abstraction of ideologies has no basis in what one actually is, and that makes a person live an inauthentic life. One of Dostoevsky's existential messages is that the purpose of life is to act properly by being authentic to yourself. Kierkegaard's work focused on the individual as well, highlighting the importance of subjectivity, personal choice, and commitment. Although he was a Christian, he was very critical of Christendom, which was represented by the Danish established church, who made people live falsely religious lives. People became so absorbed in the crowd that they became mere numbers of a herd. When religion is integrated into society, the social
Another thing to note here is with some of these early pre-thinkers of existentialism, they were a good number of them were Christian theologians searching for meaning, and so they were coming from more of a secular approach in philosophy. So they weren't necessarily coming from a I'm going to use the Bible like glasses and view everything from the Bible. They were coming more from a secular humanistic standpoint of this is philosophy, and we're going to use philosophy to explain meaning. And so it's interesting. I've reviewed some of their works, and as a theologian myself, I think they're a little flawed in their in their conclusions. I think there's a little they're a little bit askew in their theology, but that's another topic for another time that we could really get into that. Let's keep going on here.
social scene becomes the religious scene, and for that reason, religion had died. Kierkegaard suggests that the only way out of existential angst is to take a leap of faith towards Christianity, emphasizing a personal relationship with God, the subjective truth of the individual. It is the ultimate irrational experience, which is the most rational thing to do. Nietzsche, on the other hand, was completely disillusioned with religion, announcing that God is dead. He calls Christianity slave morality, which resents the virtues of the powerful and promotes turning the other cheek. He wanted to create life-affirming individuals, calling for a master morality, which does not intend to oppress others, but rather create new values and ways of life, through a revaluation of all values, giving way to the figure of the Übermensch. Thus man becomes God. It is interesting to see the profound doctrinal differences between the thinkers, even while sharing a common template. Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard were theistic thinkers, while Nietzsche was atheistic. The term existentialism was actually coined in the mid-1940s by Christian existentialist Gabriel Marcel, who focused on the modern individual's struggle in a technologically dehumanizing society. Marcel later came to reject the label he himself had coined, to dissociate himself from figures such as fellow French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, preferring the term Christian Socratic in honor of Kierkegaard's work with Socratic irony. Sartre adopted the existentialist label and greatly helped popularize existentialist thought. He proposes the famous maxim, existence precedes essence. Ancient Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle believed that essence precedes existence. Every human being.
So let me explain this real quick. So when they're saying that existence precedes essence or essence precedes existence, that's an older. So keep in mind that we're jumping into kind of the late era of philosophy. And so at the very beginning of philosophy, you had what was known as the theory of forms. And you saw this a lot in the works of Plato and Aristotle back in ancient Greece. And the idea was that the essence, the form of something was already out there. And that basically the existence of that thing, the existence of that essence came into being, right? So your essence is out somewhere, right? I'll say the void. That's probably not a great explanation of it. And that essence came into existence, physical existence. This is used for everything. I mean, one way I heard it explained was even a chair. You know, like the essence of what is a chair was out there. And we didn't invent the chair. We merely brought the essence of the chair into existence. And so that's where they're saying the essence precedes existence. Now, nihilism flips it. And that's where they say the existence precedes the essence. And so why that's important to note is they're saying that if the essence pre-exists, then it has purpose, it has function, right? The purpose and function of a chair pre-existed the existence of the chair itself. So when the chair comes into being, the chair shows up in existence, its purpose is already set for it. It's a chair. People are going to sit on it. I'm super simplifying this, but if you flip it and someone puts some wood together and they say, what is this thing? They're like, I don't know. I didn't have a reason for it, but I'm going to sit on it and call it a chair. Like, again, I'm super dumbing it down, but with nihilism, they would say that humanity, existence, precedes the essence. And so we exist, and then we have to determine why we exist. We have to find meaning. We have to find the essence, ourself. It's not assigned to us. And so so everything's meaningless. Everything's pointless. You exist, therefore you exist. So you've got to find some sort of reason to exist.
Being is born with an essence. That is what gives us the properties of being a human being. This is known as essentialism. Sartre flips this around and tells us that we are a blank canvas, that we create and make ourselves through what we do, and thus existence precedes essence. In this way, our life is a work of art. However, this freedom also becomes a slightly horrifying realization. Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Martin Heidegger is another important existentialist.
So I want to point out there, man is condemned to be free. The idea is you can't blame God. If you murder someone, you can't blame God. You can't say the devil made me do it. Why did you kill someone? Because you're a horrible human being. And so that's going to an extreme, but it's also, God's not going to give you purpose, right? So a lot of people, as I see in the secular world, say, everything happens for a reason. And do you believe in God? No. Okay. Then how can you say that? I don't know. I'm just trying to be helpful. I'm trying to be hopeful. Right. So now some people, would say, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the universe giving back and karma. Right. So that's whatever your belief is. But some people don't believe in a higher power or any power. They're quite nihilistic, but they will say hopeful things just to manifest hope within themselves. So he was very distraught by the idea that you're free to do whatever you want, because then what do you do? Like, what are you supposed to do? No one's going to give you purpose. You got to find it. So I just thought I would point that out real quick.
Existentialist who talks about the idea of thrownness, that we are all thrown into the world, arbitrarily born into a given family, within a given culture, and at a given moment in human history. These givens are facticities. The tasks we decide to be constantly engaged in and care about have very little to do with us. They're sort of decided for us by the particular facticity that we were born into. We are thrown with neither prior knowledge nor individual opinion into a world that was there before and will remain there after we're gone. Sartre would tell us that freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. He was very influenced by Heidegger's masterpiece, Being and Time, publishing his own book titled Being and Nothingness. However, Heidegger distances himself from Sartre's existentialism due to major differences in their ideas. Once you realize that you are completely free, the responsibility that follows and the infinite possibilities that are open to you creates a sort of dread. It leads many people to adopt what Sartre calls bad faith, a way of denying the fundamental nature of our freedom and responsibility and accepting something as true that might not be convincing but that is convenient and easy for us to believe in. He gives the example of a waiter who does not enjoy his job but goes to work every day and assumes the role of a waiter without being fulfilled. And when he thinks of applying to a different job and all the difficult questions that would come along with that sort of life choice, he convinces himself that it would be better to just remain a waiter. This is similar to Kierkegaard's idea that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom.
Right, we say this on a regular basis, and sometimes we call it analysis paralysis, right? It's like there you go to a place to eat, the menu's too big. It's like when you go to Cheesecake Factory and you're like, there's pages here, okay. And and you're like, analysis paralysis, what do I do? And I think we see, I personally feel like I see this in our day-to-day. So someone asked me, the same guy that I talked to last night, he said, he was from another country, and he said, asking me my perspectives on America, and he was asking me what I see in America, and I was saying, well, I think we've lost the American dream. Not that it's no longer available, it's that people are too lazy to do it. A lot of times people will, what I see out in the world, and this is what I'm trying to combat with the Soul Ward, is people will just believe something, and they'll kind of pick a belief, right? So they won't really study it to the nth degree. They won't really push that thought down the line. It creates an anxiety of, I don't want to know anymore. I want to know just enough to make my choice. And I don't really want to know if it was a good choice or a bad choice. I just want to be confident in my choice. And so with the same guy, he took a naturalistic, nihilistic approach to his personal philosophy and way of life. So I started to push his belief system down the field a little bit. I said, okay, you believe that, then what do you do with these outcomes? What do you feel about these things? And so he was saying that his mere existence is survival. And so survival of the fittest. So then I push him on genocide. If it's survival of the fittest, why is genocide bad? Right? And now he's uncomfortable with the idea that he's ascribing to an ideology that would promote, genocide. Did I say Genesis earlier? Genocide. And so he's like, no, I'm not for genocide. Okay, why? Why aren't you for genocide? Why have you now come up with a belief that is inconsistent with your worldview? It's not that he can't believe that, but why? Why do you believe what you believe? Obviously, it's not survival of the fittest then. Or can you explain it, right? So some people come up with social constructs are for the survival of the fittest. Well, then we get into Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Should you blow up? And this is kind of what we talked about. I think with Sean a little bit. But why should you blow up? Yeah, I did talk about this, Sean. Why should you blow it up just because you have the power to? So why not? Why is it wrong? And so anyways, this one thing we do here is we try to push that idea down the road a little bit. And so I see a lot of analysis paralysis with worldviews and religion and with philosophy. People are like, I don't know, I'm just going to be comfortable where I'm at and I don't want to think about it. It comes to the absurdity that we'll get to in a moment. But when they talk about absurdity, it's like you ask a question And people say that's an absurd question. Some of the questions I asked a guy last night, he was like, why, why that's a made up circumstance. Well, I would never be in that situation. Why would I make that? Why would I do that? And so philosophers, they ask a lot of they create these absurd circumstances to create a point of conversation to be more broadly applied throughout your life. We'll get to exactly that with the myth of Sisyphus here in a second.
One may possess the ability to freely act, but if one never uses it and thinks about an endless sea of possibilities, one is effectively not capable of freely acting. One gets lost in the infinite, as Kierkegaard puts it, and lives a totally unimaginative everyday life. The other part is getting lost in the finite, that is, not considering enough possibilities and just mindlessly going around the demands of culture and social expectations. People live a complete lie. They live because of what everyone tells them that's what one does. This can be a scary realization, as most people are not aware of this. They see everything they do as their own choice.
This gets actually back into our Alan Watts Eastern philosophy, where he said there's all these people who are just milling about, doing what they're told. And he said there's this man who comes down from the mountain, right? The outsider. And he says, nice game everyone's playing here. I'm not going to play your game. No judgment. You do you. You play your little game. I'm not going to play it. And he was referring to, this is, what he called the social game. And so it's funny that we're seeing this here too, the social game. People are just doing what everyone else does. Why? Because it's the social game. They want to fit in. They don't want to be the outsider because there's risks in being the outsider. Let's continue on.
Similarly, Heidegger tells us that inauthenticity occurs when we embody only our facticity, the reality we're being thrown into, and our fallenness, falling into tasks that other people tell us to do. One becomes das Man, the they, surrendering one's existence to a formless entity. Instead of choosing to do something that we want, we do it because that is what they do. Albert Camus was an acquaintance of sort. However, the disagreements between them emerged quickly, and they eventually split. Camus is considered to be an existentialist, even though he firmly rejected the term throughout his life. He contributed to the rise of the philosophy known as absurdism. Camus describes the absurd as a conflict between the human tendency to seek inherent value and meaning in life, and the human inability to find any meaning in a purposeless, meaningless, or chaotic and irrational universe. Man seeks for meaning only to receive the unreasonable silence of the universal response. Camus states, "I do not believe in God, and I am not an atheist." This reflects the notion of the absurd. The search of the possibility of the existence of God is humanly impossible, but this also entails that the proof that God does not exist is impossible too. The myth of Sisyphus is a fierce expression of the absurd. Sisyphus is the absurd hero, condemned to a lifetime of rolling a large boulder up a hill, only to reach the top and have the boulder roll back down to the bottom for him to start all over again for eternity. This incredibly vivid imagery is an allegory of the human condition, of our...
So I want to get into two things here. One, he said that absurdity, he's promoting that is impossible to prove that God exists, but it's also like impossible to prove that God doesn't exist. It's an absurd task all around. And so I do think that that is again, that's where some people can assume a little bit too much. A lot of people say it's impossible to prove that God, that God exists or Jesus was God, all this kind of stuff. And from my own personal theology and philosophy, what I've seen is that you can prove a lot of things. Now, some people say, well, it's not scientific. The gentleman I spoke with last night, he had the idea that the universe was eternal. It's always been and it always will be as far as space goes. And I asked him a question philosophically. I said, okay, draw a timeline. Okay. Put a little dot in the middle of the timeline. You're here, right? It goes forever this way, goes forever the other way. All right. Now we're going to go to the beginning of the timeline. If there are infinite moments before this moment, how do we get to this moment? if there are infinite moments before this moment, how do we get to this moment? So on your timeline, you're going to put an infinity of moments before the little point you put. How do you ever arrive at the point you're at? He said, well, I'm here. I said, exactly. So now we're speaking scientifically. The constant of this little philosophical experiment is you are here. Now we want to come up with a theory of how you got here. Now, modern science would not say that the universe is infinite. Modern science does point to a creation point known as the Big Bang. And so whether you believe that God said, let there be, and bang, there it was, whether you believe in it just, the Big Bang coming across for some sort of creation ex nihilo, a creation out of nothing, that's that, whether you believe in a goddess or a god or whatever. But modern science would say, the universe has not always pre-existed. So he fashioned himself a scientist, but he actually wasn't adhering to modern secular cosmology. And again, it's one of those interesting things where as we study more, we learn more, we become stronger in our own beliefs. And so it only helps you to just kind of dig deeper into what it is you think you believe so you can know more. So first of all, there's that. Now, the other part is he talks about the myth of Sisyphus. He talks about there's this guy who's cursed, and you get into the full story, he's cursed by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill. And when the boulder gets to the top of the hill, it's going to roll back down and he has to do it again. Now that's absurd, right? Why would we ever contemplate that? That's dumb. Of course, this is a mythological story. It's a myth. It doesn't happen. No one's ever going to roll a boulder up a hill just for it to roll back down again. So a lot of people will reject the very notion of the premise of the question. And this is what I find a lot, unfortunately for me, is when I'm speaking with people and you try to get philosophical and you try to ask them this question, they say, well, that's an absurd question. I refuse to answer it. I refuse to challenge my worldview. I refuse to challenge my ideas because I don't see the point or the purpose. So the reason why philosophers do this is they need a simple argument, because if I said, you go to work every day, you do this, you do that, all right, you can pick apart any situation. Well, I go to work because I need a paycheck. Okay, but why do you need the paycheck? Oh, because I need to buy things. Why do you need it? Because I need to eat food. Why do you need food? And so they reduce it down to an easier to understand. And you see this in a lot of religions, right? In my own religion, when Jesus wanted to give a certain deeper lesson, he went parabolic. He would give a parable to really lower the understanding level of like, hey, okay, let's forget reality and let's just say there's a guy who built his house on the sand. Well, that's dumb. Why would anyone build his house on the sand? So you see this with many other religions and their parables as well, which we'll examine more of those as time gets on. But so here we have this man rolling this boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down again. He says, this is a futile effort. It is utterly meaningless. Why does he do it? Now, in the true myth, he's cursed to do it by the gods. So the gods have told him to do it, so he has no choice. So because he's doomed to do this for all eternity, he has to probably assign meaning to what he's doing, find value in what he's doing, because he's cursed, he's doomed to do it. In the human condition, you're doomed to exist, these philosophers are saying. You're doomed to exist. You're doomed to your freedom. You're doomed to do whatever you want because life is meaningless. And so what do you do? And so they're saying you go to work, you make money, you do all this stuff, and what? You're just rolling a boulder up a hill. That's all you're doing. We're going to get more into, more. I'm really excited to dive into this more tomorrow from the Christian theological perspective, as espoused by Hebrews, the letter of Hebrews that I'm very excited to get into. But to address this a little further, let's listen a little deeper, and then we'll actually just wrap up with this one video. We'll keep it a little shorter tonight.
Futile search for meaning in an indifferent and meaningless universe. While working on the same mundane tasks, we all have to push our own boulders, only to watch it roll back down. Although all this only scratches the surface of existentialism, it can serve as a guide to explore its diverse thinkers, with core ideas such as authenticity, individuality, subjectivity, freedom, and responsibility, in order to understand and pursue the meaning of your life.
So, here we'll get back to our main screen here. So as we've just gotten a great introduction to existentialism, now he was just showing us like there's greater points in individuality and freedom and subjectivity and authenticity to explore these major themes within existentialism. But tonight, I hope you've gotten a good understanding of existentialism and the absurdity that is seen. The reason why absurdity plays into it is because they're like, life is actually meaningless. So we have to assign meaning, and that's kind of absurd. Life is absurd, and it's absurd to think you can assign it meaning, but it's also absurd not to, because then you're hopeless. So just a few comments that we have from you guys today is, some of you guys are saying it doesn't sound like it promotes much hope. No, it doesn't, and that's the point. People were so hopeless and so lost by nihilism that they're just begging for meaning. And so these are irreligious, mostly people that we're seeing like, I need to find meaning in life. I'm just dying for meaning. Life is so meaningless. And so, Tom says, interesting how some can assign the idea that the world always was and always will be, but they can't assign the same belief to a creator who he himself has those qualities and created the world out of himself. And yeah, that's a really interesting point. A lot of them would flip it back on you, right? So we would say, you believe that the world, when we get to a creation ex nihilo, they can flip it back on us and say, well, you say the world, we say the world was created out of nothing. You say it was created by God, but where did your God come from? And we'd say he always was and always will be. And so, it can go back and forward. There are some good apologetic Christian responses to that. And I'd love to discuss that deeper in our Discord channel. And that's one way you guys can get involved, is jumping into the Discord channel and furthering the conversation. With that being said, I'm going to close out tonight. And then we're going to get into a few other comments that came in here in a second. But guys, I hope you've enjoyed this absurd look into existentialism, the escape from nihilism, the desperate search for hope. I hope, there it is, that you will assign meaning to this video and assign that meaning to be valuable. And you can show that it has value by supporting us over at the Soul Ward. You can go to soulward.org, click on the Support Us tab. You can cut us a check either to the P.O. Box, or you can donate through PayPal. You can support us by buying some of our merchandise that we have. Either it's coffee cups, hats, shirts, all that good stuff, different ways you can support us. But guys, please keep checking in for different ways to see these different worldviews, different religions, different philosophies. And I hope you can be encouraged to challenge yourself and as well in your own beliefs. We present everything here at the Soul Ward. It doesn't mean that you have to believe it. It doesn't mean that you have to not believe it. We're going to be kind of rough on all beliefs because we kind of want to shake them a little bit and see what falls out. And I hope you'll do that with your own beliefs, your own theologies, your own worldviews, that you'll be shaken a little bit to see what comes loose. This is something that in the Christian doctrine we would call wood, hay, and stubble, right? My hope for you is that all the wood, hay, and stubble would burn up and you would be left with things that remain, precious gems and hard steel. So thank you guys, and I'll be right back for those for that live chat and some extra questions.